screen here. Well, before I share my screen, let me just say good afternoon to all of you. I know you have been filled with so much information today that will help you in your personal lives, your professional lives, and I'm hoping that this session is the same, where we can discuss and talk a little bit about the foundation of the Black family. I'm going to share my screen. Unfortunately, when I share my screen and my slides, I won't be able to see you, but you'll see me. But if there are any questions in the chat, if one of the moderators are able to notify me to let me know, that would be wonderful. So again, thank you all so very much for being a part of my session. Share my screen here. So my name is Nakisha Randolph. I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist. I'm from Orange, well, actually originally from Mount Pleasant, South Carolina, but I live in Orangeburg, South Carolina with my husband, Devin Randolph. I have private practice here called Anthropos Counseling and Consulting, and I work full time with the VA. I am the lead trauma specialist here at the clinic in Orangeburg. So as I said again, I'll say it again, it is my pleasure to be able to spend the next 15 minutes or so with you all talking about the foundation of the Black family. I really want this to be a discussion. I'm not sure if you're able to unmute by audio or if it's just by chat, but I do have some areas in here where we can discuss, reflect, and talk about maybe even share our own experiences with our own families. I always like to tell people anytime I do a presentation that, you know, if there's anything that is triggering about anything that we're talking about, take a moment. If you have to mute or just take a moment to, you know, grab a glass of water or just take a walk, that is completely fine. I want this to be a safe environment where we're able to talk. And sometimes when we do talk about trauma and traumatic experiences, it does tend to bring emotional responses, which are natural, that may be really triggering or make us feel sad or emotional. So with that being said, I'm going to jump right into it. So here's some, just an overview of kind of what we wanted to discuss today. Just a summary of roots and some of the themes that are presented. Definitely, we want to address the trauma of the Black family then versus now. And also, and finally, the power of rewriting and renaming our story. So, as I read the book, there were a number of different themes to Alex Haley's Roots. This novel was written in 1976, and if you have seen the movie, I don't know if you're able to unmute. If you are, that's great. If you've seen the movie versus reading the book, if you can unmute and tell me which one you've seen before we get started, that would be great. Or read. Have you read it or seen it? Okay. So I can't hear anyone. So I'm assuming that someone is in the chat writing your responses. But regardless if you've seen the movie or if you have actually read the book, It is an extremely horrific tale, but at the same time too, it goes over and profoundly shows us the life of seven generations of a Black family. And so I had the book. I had the book, and it is, as I mentioned before, as it goes through the lifetime of, or the generation of, and legacy of Kunta Kinte, it shows us a lot of different things. And so in here, I wrote some of the themes that jumped out to me, and I may stop sharing my slides only because it's hard and I want to engage with you all in the chat if you're chatting. But some of the themes that I selected, and I'll briefly go over them, is family traditions, starting from the very first chapter, talking about Kunta Kinte's parents, and while his mom Benta was pregnant with him, and after she delivered him, and his dad Omaro, going away for 7 days, or well, shouldn't say going away, but for 7 days as their tradition and their tribe, thinking about what to name their son. So family traditions are seen throughout the book as written by Alex Haley. Obviously, love. Love is shown in the generations of the Black family. Assimilation, it was another theme. Kunta Kinte having to assimilate to a new tribe, a new culture once he was taken as a slave. We have themes of identity, separation, religion, survival, and trauma. And like I said, I'm going to stop sharing my slide. I'm sorry, I'm a little all over the place. I want to be able to engage and interact with you, and I don't think I'm going to be able to do that necessarily through this format. Okay. All right. Okay. So Katera, you said that you've seen parts, but not the whole movie. Okay. Ford says that, Cariana, I'm sorry if I mispronounced your name. You said you've seen pieces of the movie, or you've seen the movie a long time ago. For those of you who have either read or seen the movie, what other themes outside of what I may have mentioned did you pick up? Was there a theme of resiliency, perhaps? Okay. So, as I mentioned, those particular themes, and one obviously really big theme that we do see throughout um, the book is a theme of trauma. Yes, Carla, definitely resiliency for sure. And so, why is it important for us to talk about the foundation of the family as it relates to Alex Haley's roots? I think a lot of times when we are thinking about our own family, our own mental health, and how we were reared, a lot of times, if we're not careful, some of the same traumatic experiences that have been inherited by us from our parents or our parents' parents, or just intergenerational trauma, it repeats itself. And so I think as we look at Alex Haley's roots and we think about the foundation of the Black family and even our families, we can see the thread of intergenerational trauma. But trauma was not the only thing. As I mentioned before, there are other themes of this particular book that may be able to relate to some of the themes in our lives and with our families, like survival, religion. I don't know about you all, but religion in the book played a part um, in who Kunta Kinte was, as well as his family. And so he being Muslim, his daughter, after he was married, his daughter was baptized as Christian. Themes played a religion. Excuse me, religion played a huge part, especially on slave farms, so to speak, back then, because that's something um, yep, Carla, another possible theme, overcoming injustice. Absolutely, you're correct. And so religion was a big part of it. And religion, even in the Black culture right now, and Black families as a foundation, is really, really something that we see often and we experience within our own families. So just moving on from our themes, when we talk about the trauma of the Black family then, and not just within the book Roots, but when we talk about the trauma of the Black family in general, um, now versus then versus now. One of the definitions that I want to provide for you all is how we as and I don't like necessarily use the word minorities. I prefer BIPOC, Black, Indigenous, people of color. We do experience something that's called race-based traumatic stress, which really refers to the mental and emotional injury that is caused by encounters with racial bias and ethnic discrimination, racism, and hate crimes. And so, why am I mentioning that when we're talking about the foundation of a Black family, or even as it relates to the book? Well, I think it's pretty obvious in the book how that is, how race-based traumatic stress plays a part in it, but also in our lives as in our lives and in our communities. Race-based traumatic stress is there. And again, as I mentioned earlier, it is transferred intergenerationally, in different things that we see that we see. So when we look at then versus now and the trauma, if you can, in the chat section, just talk to me a little bit about what you believe the differences are, or if there are any differences. I tend to believe that, as far as it relates to trauma, that trauma is still very prevalent in the DNA of Black families. And so, no, we're not on slaver, we're not working for slavers anymore. And, I know sometimes our jobs might seem like we're, slavers, but no, we're not necessarily experiencing the same things that Kunta Kinte and his family experienced necessarily, or even our ancestors. However, the trauma still exists, and really, this is not. Our history is very recent, and so tell me a little bit about what differences you see, what changes you see, or maybe if you don't see that there is a difference at all between the trauma of the Black family then versus now. So take a moment just to hop inside of the chat and let's talk. Thank you, Pamela. Said in religion, you mentioned, in the role of educators in finances, business, and politics, it was all a part of the community. Absolutely, that is and still is. And you're right, and it is still is a very prominent role inside of our community. I live in a small community, just a little self disclosure. I live in a small community in Orangeburg. And, before I started working for the VA, I was working with the school system for nearly 10 years, I think. And I have, and this, our community is predominantly Black. And when I would go into the classrooms, and especially with elementary students, when I was going to do like observations, I would always notice how, I know there's a separation between church and state. You try telling those teachers here about that, but people they would have prayer with their students, especially if, as I mentioned, kindergarten classes, before they had their snack or they ate their lunch, they would have prayer. So religion is really it really is a big part. Let's see here. Pamela also said trust was different within the community. Absolutely. And I think even now, so trust amongst, each other. I mean, in our own community, the Black community, I think was different than it is now. Of course, now we have a lot of crime that is against each other, against one another. And so I think it's much more difficult for us to be able to trust. Carrie Anna says being in survival mode then and growing and thriving now for generational wealth and health. Definitely, and even as it relates to the novel, um, that's all you had was to survive. Thankfully, in earlier parts of the book, if you get an opportunity to read the book, Kunta Kinte goes through this like ceremonial ritual for boys and is learning all these different lessons. Well, these lessons, which is a part of the foundation, these lessons help him, I believe, to survive even after he was enslaved. And those same lessons he was able to pass down to his daughter, Kizzy, for survival and vice versa. And so I guess the greater question is survival and being able to like pass down, not survival in the sense of, oh, my life is in danger, which at times in this day and age, our lives, Black lives are in danger. But how do we teach our kids how do we teach them about the mental survival when things are happening or they can't get what they want or it's hard for them to cope with something that's going on? How do we teach them that mental survival that is needed to be able to go through and endure different situations that may be thrown at them? Okay. Katera says cultural values have changed. Many people were all about family back in the day. Now many people don't communicate with their family due to issues and disagreements. I definitely agree. That is absolutely true. There is a very divisive type of, I don't want to necessarily use the word spirit, but there is a very divisive tactic that is going on within families. I just had a conversation with someone the other day who they had just lost the aunt, and the aunt had an executive will, and in the will she had named one person, and then but however the caretaker, she had said that before she passed away, said I want to make the caretaker who I was talking to on the phone, I want to now make you overall everything after I die. I want you to be able to take care and handle my affairs. Well, that wasn't in writing. And so now the family is, completely divided. There's an argument about it. the one person who I was talking to recorded her saying it, despite the fact that she had signed a document. So there's so many different things that are going on that causes us, I think, to be really divided and disagree, and so that we're not able to communicate like we used to. And we're getting away, in some sense, not maybe our personal families, but as a Black family, maybe getting away a little bit from those family values that we once had. Um, see, Jane says, in many ways, it seems like the same things with new systems. For example, enslavement, yep, yeah, absolutely, is now mass incarceration, death by police was once lynching, etc. Absolutely. So I don't think, Pamela says, I think people don't reach out in the church and discuss mental health. That's absolutely true. Most people don't. And it's sad because, and I know we've heard people say this a million times over, you can have Jesus and you can have a therapist, but I think within the Black church, it is, we are making some strides, but not enough to discuss mental health. There's still a lot of stigma around mental health. And honestly, not only is there the stigma is there because the trauma is still there. And what happens is we have congregants or people who are attending church who are going Sunday after Sunday, and they have a lot of trauma and a lot of hurt, and their spirits are wounded. And so, what happens to people who don't necessarily get the treatment that they need in order to fully recover? They walk around half healed. And so when we go into churches and and if I do a training in a church, or if I'm joined, with the other people, other therapists, sometimes we do like once a year, we'll do like we may go to like a denomination, like an AME or a Baptist, and do a training. That's one of the things that I always talk about, that we can't walk around half healed. We have to be fully healed. And that means addressing our trauma, not running away from it, not avoiding it. We don't want to avoid it. We don't want to suppress it anymore, because every time we suppress our trauma, what happens is the symptoms grow larger and larger and larger until they completely take over our lives. So thank you for that. Right. Dr. Bryant says, I believe we teach our kids mental fortitude by first teaching them about their emotions and providing a safe space for expression. We have to retire the phrases, you got to get over it or got to be strong. I absolutely agree with that. We have to, and not only do we have to teach our kids first about their emotions and providing a safe space, but we have to give ourselves permission. I'm not assuming that all of us on here are women. I think so far in the comments I've seen that we are, that is mostly female in this particular session, but we carry a lot as women. We really do. And we have to, and a lot of times we don't give ourselves the permission to feel, because we are mom, we are the therapist, we are the wife, we are the partner, we are the daughter. We are so many different things. We are so many different roles, and we don't give ourselves permission to feel. And so, and believe it or not, our kids, they're watching us. And so when we're teaching our kids that it's okay to have emotions, number one, and then it's okay to express the emotions that you're having, we too have to do the same exact thing, so that we are not just telling our kids something, but then we are also ourselves practicing, what we're preaching. Because you're right, long are the days of telling people to get over it. You a boy, you don't act so weak. Sticks and stones may break your bones, but words, yes, words do hurt. And I can understand, empathize with your children, and I can understand why you're hurt. And then turn that back on yourself. And if something is going on with you, or you yourself are hurting, being able to empathize with yourself. Like, I'm not crazy. I'm not going out of my mind what that person said about me, or my work performance, or whatever, or if it's a broken relationship and what that person said in our last argument, it really hurt. And so not only am I going to identify this emotion, but I'm going to have to sit in it. I'm going to have to experience it, so that I'm not the parent who is telling my kids, you know, deal with your emotions, handle your emotions and your feelings, and then I'm not dealing with mine. Okay. All right. So the other thing that I wanted to kind of talk about was, what role does systemic trauma play in your life? What role does systemic trauma play in your life? Or, and if not necessarily in your life, if you're okay with sharing, you don't have to, but if you're okay with sharing, please do. And if not your life, what about some of the people that you interact with? So, what is the role of systemic trauma in your life? And just as a definition for trauma, trauma can be a distressing situation, which causes the person not to be able to cope. That's causing the person not to be able to deal with life. It leaves them powerless, as if they have no control over what is going on. I know we've all experienced trauma, maybe a little T trauma, maybe it's not the big T trauma, um, especially as I mentioned with, the events that happen in Roots. But how does trauma play a role in your life? Has it made you more resilient? Has the trauma caused you to have mistrust in relationships? Has trauma caused you to transform? That's how has it? Okay. Shimia, and if I mispronounced your name, I apologize. It says, in an effort to break intergenerational trauma, I may have overcorrected in my parenting and left my child unable to handle adversity. That's an interesting thought. And so when you say you may have overcorrected in your parenting and left your child unable to handle adversity, how can you correct that? One of my slides, my next slide, and I promise I won't be before you long. I feel like I'm at church. I won't be before you long. But one of my slides actually talks about that. So I think sometimes in our effort to make sure that we are breaking trauma, that we're not passing it on to the next, our children, or whatever happened to us, that it's not happening to our kids and our family. A lot of times we feel as if though we can't, we even if we do, as she mentioned, overcorrected, and done, not, because there's really no rule book or playbook of how we do it. All we know is we don't want our kids to hurt like we hurt, right? But guess what? There are opportunities, and I don't know how old the child is, but there are opportunities to self correct the overcorrection. And I'll talk about that in a moment. Jane said, I sought out and found the services of an excellent healthcare professional who is Black. Awesome. Good job. That's amazing. And so, getting help is absolutely one of the things, a Black woman, great. That's absolutely one of the things that I do want you to do. If you are still pondering that, like, how am I dealing with the systemic trauma that maybe not even in my life, but in my community. Like I go to work and I have to work among this, which is and it is indirectly affecting you. Getting help, seeking someone who's able to help and to guide you through, whether that is a psychologist, a psychotherapist, a psychiatrist, someone who is trusted, that you can build that bond and a relationship with. Okay. Dr. Brian said that's a hard question for me to answer because I feel like it has impacted many areas of my life. Yeah, me too. From how I was taught to view the world to the things I am working on, healing and therapy, to why I choose to do the work that I do. One second, I think I lost that here. Yeah, I mean, I definitely identify with that. Like it does systemic trauma, just like systemic racism. It affects all of us, just not parts of us. It affects all of us. Trauma, through the lens of trauma, right? We see and make meaning of life in very different ways. And that's not to say that, even with Dr. Bryan's, um, comment that her whole life, the lens of and her perspective is out of trauma. No, I'm not saying that. But when we don't get the help that we need, and we know that trauma in so many different ways has impacted us in so many different ways, and when we don't get that help, we begin to see relationships out of the lens of trauma. We begin to see our jobs and our, why, this person is, we think our employers are like, picking on us, or, giving us a hard time. And maybe they're not. Maybe it seems like, they're challenging us, but maybe they're trying to like help you so that you can get a promotion. But trauma will make you see things that are completely different from the reality or the evidence of what's really happening. So it's very important to get the help to work on the trauma that you're experiencing. And trauma can, people have, trauma can be complex, which means that it's multiple things. It could be the sudden death of a loved one. It could be being in a car accident. Trauma could look like, being abused. That's like complex trauma, like several different things. Or it could be a simple trauma, which is one thing, one single thing that can happen. Oftentimes, as Black families, or even just as Black women in general, we have experienced in our lifetime complex trauma. We have experienced multiple things that have been stacked on top of each other. And then the pandemic obviously didn't help with that at all, because that was another traumatic situation that caused an increase of anxiety and depression within us. Yeah, absolutely. Trauma changes the lens through which we see things. Yeah, as I mentioned, it absolutely does. And helping, and I think my next slide goes into like the correction. How do we not only self-correct, but correct what we see and how we make meaning of the things that we are experiencing. Okay, and that is something. Once you listen, once you break trauma, like the bands of trauma, once you're able to break those things within yourself and within your family, and it's not easy. I promise you, if it was easy, I would be a gazillionaire handing out low trauma, recovery pills and saying, here, take this, and the trauma will be gone. Unfortunately, it doesn't work that way. And some of the things I might suggest are not the easiest things to be done. But if you do it, and if you're serious about breaking generational um, thoughts and ideas and these secrets that we keep within our families that destroy our families, and if you're really serious about breaking these things, you will do everything that is necessary to break them so that you're not passing them on, or they stop with you. They stop with you, and you are released from it, and you release and exonerate your family from that trauma. Exoneration is whoo, it's big. I know I have to move on. I know I have to move on. Sorry. All right. And so how do we have the power of rewriting and renaming your story, our story? It is important that we understand, as I mentioned a moment ago, that even if you have experienced a trauma, even if your family has experienced multiple things, and some of you on here, we just don't even we won't even understand the depth that you've experienced trauma in your family. One approach that I want to talk about is like a narrative approach. I want to talk about reclaiming your life. I want to talk about reauthoring your story. And when I say story, I'm not talking about the novel. I'm not talking about something, something that you're making up, but I'm talking about your life. I want you to be able to reauthor your story. And guess what? Not only reauthor your story, but I want the character that you play to not be the character who succumbs to trauma. I want you to be victorious. I want you to be the overcomer. I want you to understand there's something that's called epigenetics. And it talks about how you could be predisposed to certain things. And in most cases, you can choose another path. So, what happens when you have experienced the trauma, right? And it's left you feeling as if though you don't have any other alternatives. Guess what? You can choose another path. I don't have to go down the same path that my mom did, or my dad did, or I don't have to do the same things that, was done to me. I don't have to experience that, because I can choose, and that's a big C. I can choose another path to take. And so when I talk about being predisposed to certain things, yes, I know that there are some mental illnesses when you're predisposed. You may have to take like psychotropic medications or something like that. I understand it. But guess what? What I am doing is giving you the power and the control, putting you in the driver's seat of your own life story, so that you can be empowered enough to say, you know what, I'm going to make a choice. I'm going to do something different. I'm going to reauthor my story to where, yes, I'm going to acknowledge that the trauma happened, but I'm not going to allow it to stop me from doing the things and pursuing the things that I need to pursue. So when we take a narrative approach, when we think about, and I know I only have 7 minutes left, when we think about taking a narrative approach, I want you all to do something for me. And I know we may not necessarily have the opportunity to follow up on this, but I do want you to journal when you have some time. And I want you to write your story. Write the story as it relates to the trauma, just as it is, how you see it. And then I want you to rewrite your story and putting yourself in a different position of power. And with that, I'm not saying to blame yourself. I'm not saying to shame yourself. I'm saying in a very respectful way, I want you to reauthor your story in a way that it puts you in a position of power. One of the things that I liked about Roots, because not all of it was, yes, it was horrid what they went through. It's horrid what our ancestors went through. It's unspeakable. I don't even have a word to describe it. Unspeakable and unimaginable. However, in the book itself, there were some things that were good about their life, like the concept of family, especially at the beginning of the book, the concept of family and tradition. I want you to reauthor your story and have goodness inside of it, because some of us don't think that we deserve goodness. Sometimes trauma makes us feel as if though we don't deserve anything that is good. We're not worthy of it. So take the approach of retelling, take the approach of reauthoring your story so that you could retell it in a different way. My husband, really quickly, got expelled when he was in high school, just doing like knucklehead things. And then after he graduated high school, got arrested. He was incarcerated for about a week. Anyways, he's a great example, I think, when I talk about trauma and some of the things that he experienced, because he was able to turn his life around, but someone came into his life. He was mentored. Someone came into his life, and he was able to go to Claflin University, then went to Cornell, and just got his PhD from University of South Carolina. And I don't say that for praise to him, but I say that because now when he retells his story, because he has some family members on one side of our family that still remember when he was, the Devin in jail, the Devin who was, suspended. I mean, expelled out of school, and so they will bring that up. And so now he retells his story. That was a part of my past. And while I own the things that I've done, I'm not the same person. And so, yes, I can tell you about that. And yes, I will own that. But I don't want you to continually associate me as if I'm that same person. And so when you reauthor your story, you give people a redefinition of who you are. You reintroduce yourself to who you are. And if people don't respect your story and how you've rewritten it, it is completely okay to cut ties. If they can only remember that past you and not the person that you've become, and not the person that you're trying to, or the things and the values that you're trying to instill in your family so that they can have a strong foundation, then you've got to cut ties. Then you've got to move on. Because, this whole notion of using like a narrative approach to understand, your story, let me tell you what it's about. It is about being able to separate yourself away from the problem, being able to separate yourself away from the trauma. And yes, that does take work, but there are people out here who are able to help you. Just taking it back to the book for a moment, because I know I only have a minute. As we look at Kunta Kinte, his life, his children and his children's children and children's children, yes, we saw a lot of the themes that I mentioned earlier. But guess what? They never let go of. They never let go, in a sense, of themselves. One thing that they didn't is themselves. And so I don't know how helpful this has been to you, but what I do want to leave you with is, please don't let go of yourself. Don't give up on your family. Don't give up on your community. Don't give up on your worth. Don't give up on your values. Don't give up on yourself. So I know I'm out of time. Being able to, yep. So I'm out of time. I'm sorry, guys. It was a little crazy earlier with my PowerPoint, but I just thought it was better if we talked versus just going through going through the PowerPoint in that way. But I really appreciate you all. I don't know you all, but I always leave with saying, and I mean this from my heart, that I love each and every one of you. I really do. I really do. And you have the power to reauthor your story and choose another path. Choose life. Because on the other side of trauma is healing. On the other side of trauma is transformation. And it's waiting for you. It is right there waiting for you, just like a ram in the bush. We don't know where that ram came from, as the Bible talks about, but there was a ram that was just waiting. And that's the same thing for you. It's waiting for you. All you have to do is, reach out, get the help that is needed, so that you can move on with your life and enjoy a satisfying life, with new meaning. So thank you all so much.